In terms of your book, God and Galileo, you talk about the book of nature and the book of scripture, or
Yes.
Galileo does. And so essentially they're separate systems. From a Christian's perspective, they'd be interdependent but almost mutually exclusive.
Yeah, almost, but I mean, they are interdependent because we see God as creator. But when we're exploring the nature of the creation, I mean, that is something we can approach experimentally. When God did something and produced the universe, and our job as scientists is to try and work out what it was that God did in that process. I don't think we're going to see God directly or verify the existence or otherwise of God, but what we are able experimentally to explore the sort of consequences of his creation, whether we're biologists or whether we're astronomers or whatever we are.
Well, to some extent you talk about the biologist looking through the microscope, or yourself looking through the telescope, seeing things that validate their belief in God, though. And I wonder if it's a problem to have a non-scientific concept or construct at the top of a scientific system.
Well, if it is a problem, I think it's one we've got to live with. I don't really see a way out of it. I mean, I don't see God being recast into a scientific concept. I mean, we may be able to, in the fullness of time, be able to figure out what God did. But to actually verify the existence of God or the nature of God, I just don't see how we can do it.
I don't know how you would like to classify yourself, but it would seem to me that you would be, from an outsider's perspective, classified as a theistic evolutionist. So essentially there's certain beliefs that go along with that, such as a belief in the prevailing cosmological model with the universe being about 13.8 billion years old, and then a fine-tuned universe, but also there being evolution and natural selection, and no special supernatural intervention is involved once evolution got underway.
Yeah, and look, that's a sort of a thing that people argue about. I mean, some of my colleagues would take that, who are Christians, would take that view that, I mean, they sort of paraphrase it as God sort of lit the blue touch paper and stood back and didn't intervene from then on. Yes. I wouldn't personally take that view. My view is that God does intervene. I mean, the whole point of prayer is that God intervenes, and we've certainly got plenty of recorded miracles where God has intervened in the system. So I'm not really a believer in a completely hands-off God, because I just don't think it's the way that things are. But certainly some of my colleagues would take that view, particularly in terms of cosmological things, that it is the process started and then it just ran. That may be, but I think at the level of human interactions, I think God does intervene. And I mean, people pray for rain, and I think it's a perfectly valid thing to do. And we're asking for intervention, and I think we sometimes get it. That gets us into all sorts of other issues about why God intervenes sometimes and not other times, and don't have much insight into that. So.
We touched base on this in relation to our communication via email before this, but you wouldn't be believing in interventionist God in relation to your work, because you would probably be approaching your work from a perspective of methodological naturalism, which is that,
yes, that's right.
That when I'm doing an experiment, I can't expect that God would intervene, although perhaps the strangeness of the quantum level for quantum physicists might mean that they think that God intervenes sometimes.
Yeah, that's sort of beyond my pay grade, that one.
Yes.
But no, I'm particularly sort of looking at the human scale for intervention, because I think that's where we see it. We had the big intervention. I think we say something about that in the book, that the incarnation was a massive sort of intervention that wouldn't be part of the normal run of things in the universe.
You're talking about Jesus Christ, because that is an exception there in terms of Christian belief, because that means that God enters into the material world, so the domain of physical science. Yeah,
so that's a big part of our belief, and I think Christians see that as a major part of Revelation. It's something I certainly have no difficulty with. I have no difficulty in believing it. Yeah, so
I wonder if there is your work, your empirical, your scientific life, and then there is your faith and the idea of grace, which forms part of your emotional life. Mm-hmm. That they're separate things, essentially.
Yeah, but it's possibly more than just your emotional life. I mean, it's a big part of human reality, as I see it. And stuff that I believe and the stuff that I don't think is experimentally verifiable. I mean, I wouldn't want to try and experimentally verify the power of prayer, for example. We're told that God would frown upon that, and I think that would be quite a reasonable thing. I mean, when going to the scientific side of it, we're sort of locked into a scientific method. it's a strange sort of thing. I mean, when you're presenting your science, you present it in a very often rather mathematical and certainly logical and reproducible way. You make some discovery. And you describe the experiment and you make it detailed enough so anybody else could do the same thing if they want to check it.